I'm Loki Karuna, and this is TRILLOQUY. It feels good to come up for a little air as I continue my executive director journey with the American Composers Forum. So glad to offer another opus for you today, and profoundly grateful for your continued listenership. Life is all about transition and change, and as I'm sure I don't have to tell you, but it's good to get a little contextual reminder every now and again, myself included. So I'll offer a little bit of that in today's TRILLOQUY. But to get us there, I'm honored to present another dialogue between myself and the illustrious Nathalie Joachim. Nathalie is a Haitian-American flutist, singer, songwriter, composer, and member of the former group known as Flutronix. Last month, Cedi Records released the final recording of Flutronix, which features a work called Black Being. This composition was performed and recorded with the Chicago Sinfonietta under Maestro Mayan Chin, featuring poetry by Jaki Shelton Green. This piece explores just what you think based on the title, Black Being. Nathalie and I chat about this work, its production, the two movements that she composed of the four-movement Black Being, and what it means for Black women and more broadly, Black people today. I'll offer a sample of Black Being to get us into my chat with Nathalie, a movement of it here called Moon Pies and Stardust. Thanks again for tuning in. More from me on the other side.
I know that for me, it was very important to emphasize our humanity. And I think that that is different than being Black, which is our own affirmation of our humanity, I think collectively and culturally. But I think in any quote unquote outsider of that culture, I think it's important for us to continually, as we know and as we feel palpably every day, to reinforce our humanity in our Blackness. And so I think that's likely how we settled on Black Being.
And when we think about Black Being, even that phrase, I think it could be really easy for people to say, oh, yeah, of course, because they're oppressing the Black man. They're doing this to the Black man. But this is a project that really does center and focus on Black womanhood. I wonder if you could speak to that aspect of this work.
Yeah, I mean, Black womanhood is just, first of all, Black women, all of the Black women in my life have just been the arbiters of like breathing life into me, literally and figuratively at every step along the way. And of course, we sort of sit at this terrible crossroads, right? Where we are impacted in so many ways in terms of the marginalization of different communities. And so I think that obviously we sit at this intersection of race, but also of gender, that is challenging to say the least. And so to some extent, we tend to bear the brunt of a lot of the brute force that comes from that marginalization. And I think, maybe the people who feel it more deeply even than us are, Black queer women or Black trans women, right? Like even further marginalized. But I think it is true that it's an interesting burden to bear as having to have been forever since the beginning of time, the bearers of life, but also the bearers of the burdens of the world. And in my life, I know that I see very deeply the caretaking that has gone largely under recognized but is so a part of the fabric of my being. I wouldn't be here myself without all of the Black women who have helped me along the way. And having transitioned into Black womanhood myself in a deep way, especially in these past handful of years, I feel the responsibility of that very deeply, but I also feel the immense power and pride that I have. I would choose nothing other than being a Black woman on this planet. So
when you talk about Black women being the givers of life, I can't help but to think about my mom and the ways in which, as I get older, I'm making a point to really show my gratitude to her by checking in more regularly, going back down south and visiting, just showing that gratitude in as much of a physical way as I can and not just an emotional way. I wonder what that looks like for you. How are you showing gratitude for the Black women who have given you life and who continue to support your journey?
I think that obviously a lot of people know me because of Femme d'Haïti, and Femme d'Haïti is a project that would never have happened without the care and love of my grandmother, who was the first person in my life to really encourage me to be my whole entire full self and to give me permission to be that and to love me through that in very deep ways that were formative, right? I don't know that I even recognized the work that she was doing that for me as a young child. But what a gift it was to be given permission to be my whole self and to also be seen as my whole self, and to be encouraged to share exactly that person unapologetically for the rest of my life. And so Femme d'Haïti was a testament to so many Black women in Haiti who have been doing the work of stewarding our culture, and reminding us of our roots, and that no one on earth can convince us that we should be trying to be anything other than ourselves. In fact, that's our superpower. And so, for me, making Femme d'Haïti was such a humongous turning point in my career. And since then, has really shifted the way that I engage with my culture, my heritage, my communities, the communities that I foster myself. And so I see the work of being a Black woman and the legacy of the Black women who have carried me in the very fabric of the being of my work as a scholar, as a researcher, as a pedagogue, as a maker, certainly, and as a person, as a community member, somebody who deeply fosters community. And so I think that that's really important, but I think it's also important to state and to note that, Flutronix began because I saw another Black woman trying to make something on her own on the internet. And instead of meeting that with some kind of like competition, my immediate response was, wow, I can't wait to reach out to this person and hope that we can do this together. Isn't that so exciting? And so I think looking back as a Black woman now to younger me, seeing that was already a part of my ethos to create space for not just myself as a Black woman to be able to make freely in the way that my grandmother always encouraged me to do, but while doing that, to intentionally create space for another Black woman to be able to do that and succeed alongside me. And so I give a lot of credit to the woman in me now gives a lot of credit to younger me for staying true to that moral compass and recognizing that, it helped enable that space for myself and for Allison as well. But it also has become something for other young Black women to look to, that we became this kind of small little light and for not just young Black women, but for young artists to see that it is possible to create something out of nothing. And it is possible to do that in community with other people. And I just feel proud, I think, of myself now because it's so, again, pervasive in everything that I make, in every room that I'm in everything that I do. and in everything that I hold to be true in my work. And the truth is perhaps the biggest guide for me in my work. And that too, it was instilled in me in my grandmother. So I feel like proudest now in my womanhood to look back at younger me and say like, wow, I'm really proud of you to have known that it was important to continue to create space, not just for yourself, but for other people to shine as well. And I'm still doing that in every corner of my life. And so I feel that itself is a legacy of the Black women who've come before me. It's certainly what we learn from all of the creative thinkers and makers that have come before us. And I always say in my work now that, like, you know, we have so much beautiful heritage and ancestry to tap into. And I think of all of the Black women who loved us deeply enough without knowing us even. Like my grandmother is one person, but thinking back again to like the women who created the network and the framework for me to even conceive of a project like Femme d'Haïti, that they loved us so deeply to make sure that our truths remained with us. And that to me is what's the legacy of the work that I'm doing now. And I think it's also the truth in the text of Jaki Shelton Green's beautiful words on Black being, that it was an important moment for her to also guide and show us as young Black women the truth, right? And that's what carried us through this project.
Centering Black womanhood in the creative process is such a beautiful thing. I think it's fair to say that it looks different when it comes to the presentation of this art, the audience. I love the sort of imagery of a concert hall filled with Black women. I would love to see it. I'll work the ticket booth. I'll work security for that to happen. But in the meantime, this is a narrative. These are stories that have to be shared with broader audiences. I wonder how you engage the opportunity or maybe even the challenge of translating Black womanhood to audiences that aren't Black women.
Yeah, I don't think of it as translation, right? I think, to go back to my heritage, one thing that is beautiful and interesting about Haitian Creole, our national language in Haiti, is that it is a language of poetry. And to some extent, in it being a poetic language, it is also a language of doublespeak. What's true about Haitian Creole is that there is always the literal thing that's being said, and there is almost always a secondary cultural understanding of what's being communicated, right? And so to some extent, when you are speaking Haitian Creole to a native speaker, you understand that they are comprehending you in a nuanced way, a way that couldn't possibly be translated literally. That is something that I've struggled with in my own works of like, okay, the label needs the liner notes for this. But I've worked even with Haitian linguists to say, like, you know, we know that this is what this says, but what it means would take me paragraphs and paragraphs to fill in, right? And so to some extent, what I've had to reconcile in my own work is an embracing of that doublespeak, right? To know that there is what is being said and that there is a secondary or sometimes tertiary level of understanding of what's being communicated culturally, socially, politically, like what statements are truly being made. And to that degree, I feel like with any audience, there is something for everybody there. And so I stay away from this idea of translation, because what we know is that there is always a compromise in translation. There's always an inherent loss. And I say that constantly when I'm speaking to my students. Like, anybody who speaks two languages can tell you that there are just some things that like do get lost in translation. That's where that comes from, right? That like there are some things that are like a feeling that are impossible to put into the words of a language that just doesn't hold that, right? And so instead of fighting against that, I think in my own writing and my own thinking and my own practice, I embrace that that there are layers and levels to this that will only be understood by other Black women. There are layers and levels of this that will be understood by all Black people. And there are layers and levels of this that will be understood by non-Black people. And each layer has its value. And rather than focusing on the inherent loss, I think of the beauty of carrying on the tradition of my people. But we know that Black people kind of have double speak throughout the diaspora, right? That's like not just Haitian people. That's true in the American South. That's true throughout the Caribbean. That's true in all of the folklore and storytelling that we see coming out of the African continent as well, right? The proverbs, the all of the small sayings and slights that mean one thing at face value, but of course have many meanings beneath them. And so to me, I feel like that's a carrying on of a legacy that is like inherent to Blackness to some extent, and is actually part of the assignment. A part of the assignment is embracing that not everything is open to or should be literally translated, right? And not every nuance is meant to be codified. That in fact, so much of the power, I know speaking as a Haitian, so much of the power of this doublespeak is this resistance to a very typical codification that comes from Western thought that sort of denies indigeneity on many levels. And so it feels important to me to be reclaiming that in my own practice. And so I worry very little about the translation. I see the value, and the hope is that everyone at every level finds their level or the extent of their own connection to that value. Obviously, this is something like we're not to like put us in an exact moment of time, but of course, having just watched the Super Bowl, it's this thing of like, there were things in Bad Bunny's performance that made me tear up deeply as a Caribbean person. Like the second that I saw those sugarcane fields, that meant something to me. I'm getting chills thinking about it now. And like, who knew that I would have tears in my eyes during a Super Bowl performance? But I don't speak a lick of Spanish, but I understand very deeply the complexity and the nuances of the humanity of these people in a way that I can't say that I embrace entirely or that I understand entirely, because I myself am like, although Haiti has such a huge part and role to play in the shaping of Latin America, that like culturally there are differences and linguistically there are differences that I could, there are nuances there that I didn't catch. But I know that to some extent as a Caribbean, I felt layers and levels of that weren't spoken and couldn't be translated, and that it was important for Bad Bunny to have that message there, whether or not all of the non-English speaking non-Caribbeans felt it, right? And so to me, that's also, that's happening as we see on a pop culture level. That was true of Kendrick's performance as well, right? And so I think that's okay. I think we need to be okay with the fact, and that everybody needs to be okay. And I think the people who are least okay with it are the ones who are most conditioned to need to codify, to need to like prescribe and understand in a very sort of delineated way. And that's just like also not how people work. So I think that's their own work to do. And my work is to be a vessel for these messages at all levels.
That's beautiful. And I love that connection to the Super Bowl performance, because as a Black person who's grandmother's grandmother was born here in the United States. For me, I felt like the bridge was an appreciation. While I may not understand the exact nuance of everything that was presented, I loved seeing something that I knew was targeting and speaking to an experience that is different from mine, and an experience that we so rarely see on the stage that large. And then, of course, when you add in the artists with whom we can have that connection, seeing Ricky Martin for the first time after so many years, getting the Latin spin on that Bruno Mars and Lady Gaga tune. I think, that appreciation for the community as it was realized, I think is an important aspect to bring to all performances, to all experiences, but certainly to Black being as well. But before we get into the specificity of Black being, one thing that I was thinking about as I listened to this work was the sort of choreography of playing the flute, singing, dealing with electronics on stage live versus doing it in a recorded fashion. Was it logistically easier or different to do what you've done on this project recorded, or was it a similar choreography as in the creation of this recording?
I think what's true is that we know that, recordings are not real life, right? Mm-hmm. That a live recording feels very different to us than a studio recording.
Right.
And so speaking of acceptance, I mean, I think we all know that there's there's some amount of manufacturedness about a studio recording that is very different than what might happen in the sort of kinetic energy of a live performance, or even a live in studio performance, right? And so yes, there's some kind of hybridity in that, yes, we are performing live, but we are also aiming for something. And so I think that, yes, anybody who saw us perform this live with Sinfonietta or with with Cincinnati Symphony, that there is staging, there's a way that, for me, it spoke to the theater of my spirit, which a lot of people also are aware now that so much of my work is about what it means to be occupying space and what it means to have your body in space and what even the theater of that is. And so how we negotiate and own space with an orchestra on stage as two Black women at the front of that was a very intentional and powerful exchange of dominating and navigating space, but also bringing in moments of intimacy that make the audience lean in a specific way, mm-hmm. all of which can't really be read in a recording, right? So what you're going for in the recording is an essence of that, right? That's the thing that we were kind of aiming for. And so it happens in this kind of manufactured way where, I am singing not always with everybody in the room, or there's, orchestras recording a certain part and we're piecing it together later. And so there is that, but I think that's I don't know anybody shies away from that these days. There are live recordings and there are studio recordings, and we recorded it, I think, to the best of our ability, in a studio way. And I think, that for sure, Elaine just did such an incredible job producing this record, that she is obviously such a pro that, she's produced a bajillion orchestral records and has is always winning producer of the year at the Grammys. And so having somebody who's an old hat at that in the room was, of course, really wonderful. But also Dan Nichols, who engineered and mixed the album for us, has done, he also engineered and mixed Femme d'Haïti for me. So we have a long recording history together. Mm-hmm. And, he also was a part of the show from its inception to this completion point. And so I felt like we were in good hands in terms of taking on the task of recording. And Sadie, I do think, does an expert job of still letting you be an artist in the midst of that, which is not always true of a label. But I think that the sort of mission of Sadie is very artist forward. And so we were really empowered to make it our way. And I think that was very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Shout out to Sadie, to Elaine, Dan. The first name I want to bring forward as we dive into just the aesthetic of this album is Jaki Shelton Green. It's one thing to engage just the sounds that were created in this, but those words play a pivotal role in just the general narrative. I wonder if you could talk about your relationship with Jaki, how that was cultivated, and the role she played in the generation of this work.
I I will say that, it's an interesting thing. I've done a lot of songs writing now. I used to not really consider myself a songwriter, but I feel like now a handful of years in here, I have to embrace myself as a songwriter, somebody
I
who
agree.
has quite a bit of text, actually. And it's not the easiest thing. And, I've now worked in a handful of different opera contexts, and the libretto is always the thing that you're like, this, I might have to struggle around this thing a little bit. And I will say that was absolutely not the case in working with Jaki. First of all, just meeting her, I am for sure, as I mentioned already, a kind of person that just sort of is like inclined to meet other Black women with warmth, because I'm excited. I'm always excited when they enter the room and I feel a connection. And Jaki's spirit is very that. There's something very comforting about her energy. And we actually first met her when we were down in North Carolina doing a residency at UNC Chapel Hill on a separate project. But they encouraged us to meet Jaki, and I was not only drawn to her just as a person, but immediately after our first conversation with her, went and purchased and read every single book of poetry that she had ever put out. In fact, this is my second setting of her work. I set a poem of hers for a piece for treble voice choir some years back now. And there is just in her writing an efficiency where every single word matters. And I think that that's not true of every writer. It's certainly not true of every librettist. It's certainly not true of every songwriter out there.
Definitely not every composer.
Yes, that's for sure. And so, I still remember very palpably to this day. So, we met her in North Carolina. We said, well, maybe we're thinking about doing this project around Black womanhood. Maybe you would want to write us a little text. Maybe we could commission a little text from you. She said, sure, no problem. And she sent us, eventually sometime later, she sent us what I think she felt might have been the first draft of this epic poem. And I am obviously not a woman of few words, but I have to say that I opened the document on my computer and I probably sat silently for at least an hour, like without moving after reading it, because it just hit me so deeply to my core. And I was utterly fascinated by the idea that someone could take centuries of history, of lived experience, of things that I know and feel in my body on a deep cellular level, things that I've experienced in this time, but probably in many others as well, that she encapsulated that so succinctly in a way that is undeniable, right? That, again, getting back to this space of humanity, that she managed to capture the beautiful complexity of what it actually means to be a Black woman living in this time or any other. And all that we have carried. I think like all of the things that I said kind of clumsily at the beginning of this conversation, she did very eloquently in this epic poem. And even if we hadn't made this project, I would be forever grateful for her. You can't see, but just out of this frame here, the text is hanging on my wall because it's still well beyond the music. This text means something so deeply to me. And it is a beautiful thing to have reflected back to you, a knowing, and again, the truth in such a clear way that affirms your own existence. And so I am just so grateful for that. And it shows you the prowess of her skill as a writer and also her knowledge as a Black female elder that we have to look up to artistically and personally. And so it was more than a notion what she created for us. And of course, gave us like a sort of Mount Everest to climb, to think like, how do you, I remember my first thought was like, maybe we just stand on stage and read the poem. Like, maybe there's no music. How do you even set this?
Mm-hmm.
How do you even set this? It's so perfect that anything that we do, like, I don't want to disturb this in any way. And so there was a lot of care that went into like how we handled it. And it also really made it so that it informed our process of writing and making, very sort of out of necessity, that there was a care for the text, that was like our utmost sort of like, just like in the center of our view throughout the entire process of making. That was very different for how we had ever made together before. But I think for me, even in my own work, even more palpably than the text of hers I had already set, that this was like, took me to a very different and personal space. And I don't know, that speaks to all the Nathalieisms in a deep way. Like, I was sold, I was also terrified, and that made it for a good combination, I think.
Long live Jaki.
Yes, for sure.
When you talk about humanity, I can't help but to think about how easy it is for humanity to be lost when you're one member of a commissioning team, or one of the violinists in this section, just one of the many people who helped make this possible. I wonder how you worked to maintain that level of humanity, considering the many, many different hands that went into this final product.
I think that kind of to like similar to this sense of like not concerning myself with translation.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I could also say that the humanity that was at the center of this was the humanity of us as two Black women who very rarely get to own that kind of space, who very rarely get to take up that much space. And so I took it as permission to center our own humanity in the making of it, and to center everyone else's contribution as a contribution to that, as committing to that project, right? That's actually what we're committing to. Whereas I think, like a lot of the rest of my work is very sort of outward reaching. This was a sort of pulling into this space and protecting it. And that actually felt important. It was sort of the reverse of like, oh, please, let's all like come in and welcome this and like all be in this together. I think it was very important for us to be very protective about what was important to us and for us in the process of making. So I wouldn't say that like, I know for me, I don't know that I concerned myself that much with anything other than protecting exactly that, which is also like what the text calls for, right? To feel empowered to do that. And what a change, right? Because so much of Black womanhood is about navigating and nurturing the comfort and ease of everyone else around you to your own detriment. And so to me, like we spend our entire lives sitting in rooms where you're making yourself smaller, in relationships where you're meant to step back so that somebody else can step forward, whether that's romantic relationship or platonic relationship or motherly relationship, right? That we work in spaces that are not designed to see us. So what can we do to not disturb the peace of anyone, whether you're just walking down the street or sitting in a boardroom, right? And so for me, this project gave us the opposite assignment. Like, what does it mean for me in this space to protect my own sense of humanity as much as possible throughout this process? What does it mean for my body, particularly as a vocalist, right? Like, to feel at peace and empowered in this space in the way that I need to be. And what a way to what a piece to signify the end of one chapter and looking into what comes next in my life, right? That that's actually this moment of life. It meets me at this moment in my early 40s in life of so much of my purpose and sense of purpose now is, especially in the world that we're living in, finding and maintaining and staying grounded and connected in the things that bring me peace, that help me feel grounded, that help me feel safe, that help me feel capable to do and to move and to make in the way that I need to. So it feels also poetic in that sense.
It's interesting that you're using these words about peace and being grounded. For me, one of the most memorable aspects of this album is the anger that I heard in Black Lights. And, you know, as I was preparing for this conversation, I found myself hesitating because there is this trope of the angry Black woman that still exists in the ecosystem. And yet I just couldn't help but to feel or hear so much anger in Black Lights specifically. I wonder if you can talk about this. Am I misinterpreting? Is there anger in this piece, in that piece particularly?
I'm going to let you toss that question to Allison. I will say, like, practically we split the movements, right? We sort of like had this version where it was the two of us where we co-wrote a lot together. But then when it came to the orchestral version, we divided and conquered. And so the outer movements, which are inherently sort of like darker, are speaking to what was coming through Allison's spirit at that time. And the inner movements, which are inherently Nathalie coded, where they're like very, I have a Pisces moon and Pisces rising. So I'm a very like dreamy, you know, like she's giving airy fairy. And so to some extent there's a playfulness in the movements that and also just a sort of like lingering, there's a dreaming, right, that happens in the middle movements that is like more central to my spirit. I can't even think of, I'm trying to think of everything I've ever written. I don't know that I've ever written anything that sounds angry. So I don't know. It's not me. Okay. So I don't know. I'm not going to say anything. I don't know. But we did, you know, we made our own creative choices in that sense. So I'll let her field that question for you. But
Fair enough. Yeah. Well, I did notice the inclusion of Water Babies, which is a piece that I've had the pleasure of getting to know in its various iterations. I wonder if you could talk about the relationship that you have not only with Water Babies musically, but Water Babies conceptually. Again, considering how long it's been a part of your creativity.
Yeah, I think that, right, because that's what you saw, like a very early, you saw a show somewhere where we did that, right? That
I did, yeah. Maybe Library of Congress years ago.
Right. Something like that. Okay, so, yeah, I mean, the concept of Water Babies, like for me, it's levels and layers, right? Obviously, so much of my research and scholarship has been connected to Haitian folklore, particularly Vodou, right? And so many of our, not only the Vodou spirits that connect to water, but also so many of our songs are written about and around water, right? That like obviously very, very deeply speaks to how we as people for centuries have been thinking about what it means to be nurturing people who are being forced in the, you know, through the Middle Passage, right? Like, what does that look like? What does it mean for, we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of songs in Haitian Creole that reach towards, you know, the protection of these spirits as they cross the water, right? And so this concept of Water Babies was not new to me because on a folkloric level, it's just so, it permeates Haitian folklore and culture. And those are folklores and stories and songs that I'm like deeply attached to in a very palpable way. It's also just like the thinking, you know, like there's a beauty of all of this as it connects to folklore, but it's not, yeah, and I don't mean to like single Haitian people out. That's also, you know, there's tons of West African ideology that reaches towards the water as well. And that's also true in African American storytelling. And so these are concepts that we have shared as a people throughout the diaspora. But there is something so beautiful and painful of thinking of this concept of water babies, what it means for unborn children. To take it back to Haitian folklore for a moment, there is a word that is like sort of a very old Haitian word that is used in a lot of our folkloric songs connected to water. And the word is chovi. And chovi is actually a word that it's hard to translate, but it basically means a sort of unborn child, right? And many of the songs connected to water are speaking to children who didn't make it, who were either thrown overboard or whose mothers lost them in the passage, or whose mothers took their own lives along the way and took their children's lives with them, not able to endure this journey through the Middle Passage. And what does it mean to even have a language that has to have a word for the unborn child? So for me, when I read about when we were sort of dissecting the poem and we got to this space of water babies, it touched in a very sort of spiritual place for me, because like one of our great spirits, Ezeli is the protector of the children living and unborn, it's a beautiful thing to think about, not just literal babies, but of course, those of us who carry children and care for them, and that we are all someone's water baby, right? That in fact, it's there are layers and layers to this metaphor. It is how we come into life. Our connection to water is such a deep part of our life force. And this line that recurs in the poem of like the water babies are singing feels so important to hear. Especially juxtaposed against like what we know, or can sometimes be this sort of like trope of the siren song, and particularly Black women as sirens, this sort of temptress, right? This like woman who's hypersexualized, who's trying to lure you into something salacious. But to transform that idea of the siren song into a lullaby was like immediately where I went. Like, what does it mean to think of the songs of these children, the songs of these women, and to listen to them deeply, right? So that movement actually opens in such a way that we sort of like blossom into something that has movement, but stasis, lightness, but darkness all at once, and is centered around the shape of a lullaby, right? And even that as the song becomes more frenetic, like as the energy of the song shifts through the movement, that you hear that the voice is always giving this siren call. There's not really that energy doesn't infiltrate the voice. It's sort of like it actually reinforces the calm that must come over you in moments of protection, in moments of facing something unthinkable, in moments when the world around you becomes, very sort of like fiercely chaotic, or the energy around you is it becomes unwieldy. And that to me was like how I thought of shaping that movement. And those are the stories that like came to me very deeply, but there was like no choice but to sort of lean into what a lullaby feels like, particularly in the opening, but also in the closing of that movement. Thinking about the silencing of this world around you while this song sort of like keeps coming, right? That we keep coming despite having been sort of like thwarted many times along the way.
And based on the way that you've described your process, I would guess that moon pies and stardust is also one of one of yours. Yeah. When I listened, first of all, the title just it's almost like a calming sort of mantra: moon pies and stardust. You can't even say it and be upset.
I know. That's why I was like, this one's mine.
The word that came to mind for me as I listened through it was hope. I wonder, through all of this pain and struggle and chaos that you were naming, what do you hope for? What do your hopes look like at this point?
Oh, gosh. I mean, first of all, that movement is full of hope. It itself like taps into, there's something delicious about every word, right? This sort of evocation of nostalgia and ease that I think is like so beautifully put in this section of the poem by Jaki. But yeah, that it leaves you, that we keep coming, is like, there are all these like beautiful moments of like this has happened and that has happened, but we keep coming. And there's something really, I don't know, there's something delicious about it. I find it to be sort of like a delicious thing to sort of even wrap your mouth around the text. Like, as you said, like it's impossible to say moon pies and stardust and feel anything but this sort of like light, right? And so I think in this moment, in my life, I see in the midst of this chaos that we're living through, nothing but light ahead, right? In some way, it's been very interesting that so much of this past probably decade of my life, like going back to when I first started working on Femme d'Haïti, which was 10 years ago now, that so much of this past decade of my life has been about reconnecting to the light that already exists. And allowing that to guide me in ways that are, even in the shakiest moments, just unshakable. And so it's that light of all of the women who have done this work before me that guides me. It's the light that I know is imperative for me to keep shining ahead for whoever may come behind me, to know that our ancestors left us not only blueprints, but songs and stories and poems that ring true today, and to be following in the footsteps of that and to be committed to that in every single aspect of my practice, with every fiber of my being. I feel that light. I'm living that light. And that's the hope that I see. That's the hope that I live and breathe into every moment. And I think it's like the most radical way to be existing in this time, an unthinkable time that maybe none of us saw coming. I certainly did not have any of this on my life's bingo card, but it also doesn't feel like a mistake, right? It feels like the past decade, for sure. And like the past 2 decades, nearly 2 decades of Flutronix for sure has been like the work of me getting closer to this light and closer to being able to harness that light, for myself and for others. And so that's what I see. That's the hope that I have. That I know that like, if that worked centuries ago, this is actually, in fact, what the past decade plus has been preparing me to do. That's the work that I've been, that the universe and the ancestors have been preparing me to do for this moment that we're living through right now. So I know that the world isn't going to end. I know that this career holds things that I have yet to even realize or dream into existence as of yet. But I know that also that light and like becoming familiar with it and letting it warm me from the inside out and radiating it out in every moment that I can, and continuing to be the truth, continuing to create space for as many people as possible around me along the way, and like staying grounded and like protecting that is the thing that's giving me hope for myself as an artist, as a person, and certainly as a Black being.
This recording comes out on Friday, February 13th. Any concerns there about a Friday the 13th release? Is there any significance we should be considering?
What? I'm a witch. I love that Friday the 13th. I think the 13th like being a bad thing is for people who don't like witches. But I also feel like, 13, there's the, you know what I mean? 13 is like such a significant number, and thinking about lunar phases and thinking about how 13 occurs in nature. And there are so many like beautiful planetary transits happening on this here Friday the 13th coming. So I think it's an auspicious day. If you ask me, I don't see it. I'm not scared of Friday the 13th. And so I don't know. I feel good about it. It wasn't a day that we select. I don't think that I realized that, I knew it was a 13th. I don't think I realized it was a Friday, but certainly when I found out, I was like, ooh, auspicious. So I'm excited about it. But also, I am, as I said, Pisces moon, Pisces rising. So she's a witch deep at heart.
and Pisces sun here. So I definitely get it.
Yeah.
Well, to wrap us up, I wanted to, slightly go off topic. I can't help but to, ask artists these days as we approach this 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. There are so many different stories that are being told, so many different narratives that are being shared. We'll have everything from the John Philip Sousa Red, White, and Blue Spectaculars to, the different things that different organizations are decided to do. I wonder how you're thinking about this notion of freedom as we approach this anniversary, specific as it relates to the stories and histories of Black women, which you've always centered in your creative process.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm Haitian, so America can say what it wants, but I'm steeped right now in this, my large scale project that I'm working on now actually parallels the histories of the United States and Haiti, but coming into their nation state, like what it meant for them, what these historical texts tell us about the complexities of coming into a nation state. And I think that not enough people think about how deeply linked to Haiti's fight for independence, not just America, but the world, right? Not just the United States, but the world has to credit for it. And that at the center of all of that is like, I'm kind of like linking these histories with Haitian folkloric art, because at the center of that process is art and liberation, and that Black making is radically liberatory in its existence, right? That like the activation of the Black radical imagination, if you can think back to enslaved people who even had the will to dream towards art. I am a fan of this particular moment and what it means for us as art makers, because what's true is that, in Haiti's history, in the United States history, that like Black liberation is so deeply critical to that story, right? If you think of the United States, like we get a new America, we get a new constitution once we get those Reconstruction amendments. And those are in response to having to acknowledge the humanity of liberated Black people, even if that liberation was a farce. And even if those amendments betray us and betray those notions of freedom, right? That like this concept of nation making and freedom are things that we think are so inherently American, but for sure Haitian people have been like nudging America about that, and like we wouldn't have all the territories we have here in the United States. The United States wouldn't be what it is without Black liberation, without the liberation of Haitian people. So as we approach this moment, and I will say there's also something in the ether, right? Like this year, Haiti qualified for the World Cup for the first time in my lifetime, and they're playing Brazil, which is like our second home team in Haiti, here in Philadelphia, our first city, on Juneteenth of this year. I feel like speaking of being witchy, the ancestors are at play. So for me right now, I'm hyped about it. It's like it's infused my work in such a beautiful way, because there is something utterly empowering about picking up this surrealist practice of what it means to continually encourage our people to respell these codes, which is also a thing that Jaki talks about in her text, right? That like respelling the codes is a part of the very nature of what it means to be a Black woman, right? Making some things out of nothing, hiding messages, carrying people through the night, through the trenches towards freedom. And that our art has been so critical in that. Our art has been central to that. So like 250th anniversary, me friend, I'm like excited about it. I'm like, this is my moment. This is actually the moment for me to do the thing that we do, which is reaching back to these knowings of the past that have carried us to push forward into an unknown future, which is necessarily unknown, into something utterly new in actually a hyper-present way, right? To do it palpably in a way that we can feel right now, to be making art that moves people right now, to be thinking about making in such a way that gets to people's heart spaces right now, not worried about what anybody else is going to say, but to reach every heart that we can in this moment. That is itself there's a long lineage of Black women who have been doing that for us since the beginning of time. And so I feel like I'm ready. She's ready.
Themselves under hawk feathers, rusty coins, but we keep coming.
The reimagining of Water Babies by Nathalie Joachim. That's a part of the second movement of Black Being, available for you on all streaming services. Be sure to go check that out. I've been enjoying spending time with it myself, and I know you will too if you haven't already. So I have to admit, beyond being really tied up with my duties at the American Composers Forum, it's taken me a little time to get this dialogue released because I wasn't sure how I'd approach this section of this opus of the podcast. I want to be trill about things and to remain true to the spirit of this show, specifically as it relates to my response to this being the final collaboration between Nathalie and Allison Loggins-Hull. But as a Buddhist, I also value compassion and not just creating clickbaity sort of things. A couple of weeks ago, while thinking about this, I met with a composer friend of mine, and we're talking about different stages of being, how some people want us to be previous versions of ourselves because that's the version of us they know or that they're more comfortable with, but how at the end of the day, a true friend or someone who truly respects you takes you just as you are. I know this is the case for me. There are a lot of folks who know the version of me who was very disparaging and filled with all sorts of racial trauma, but that person is gone. I think this can even apply to loved ones lost, this idea of accepting folks as they are. As much as we might wish those who have passed on could still be here, I believe that we are exemplifying our deepest love and compassion for them by accepting them in their non-physical state, having appreciation for them by not wishing them to be in any other form than the one they're currently in. I want to apply this idea to Flutronix as it relates to the conversation you just heard. When I heard shortly before recording this interview that the group was no more, I had a reaction. I considered them among my absolute favorite contemporary classical ensembles. I'd seen them live in many venues across the country and have been a fan for longer than I can remember at this point. So, admittedly, I was a little sad. But after having this conversation with Stefan, shout out to Stefan, about stages of being, I realized that my deepest appreciation for Flutronix shows up in my gratitude for what it was and an acceptance that all things evolve and change, even end in some cases. I'm sure many of you listening might also be sad to hear that there will be no more Flutronix beyond the album Black Being. But I encourage you to transform those feelings into gratitude by, number one, streaming and buying the album, and number two, accepting things as they are. If I take a step back and apply this to TRILLOQUY even, I got to say I appreciate folks who have been recently discovering this show and writing me notes about how much they love the more salacious version of what we used to do here. And I've evolved and changed. I can appreciate that and, that correspondence, and things change, as has this show. I'm looking forward to coming back up for air, as I said at the top of this opus, by releasing more dialogues. And in the meantime, I'm continuing my journey to decolonize classical music in the way life has given me the opportunity to do so through the American Composers Forum. Hope y'all are staying safe and staying vigilant out there. There's ICE, there's war, there's division, there's the person in the White House, but there's also determination and there's hope. Center what serves you today, and I'll check back in with another dialogue, another opus of TRILLOQUY as soon as I can. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. Thank you. Peace.